What does FNAF Ruin hide behind the scenes in Roxy Raceway and Bonnie Bowl? The FNAF Ruin DLC, of course, takes the vibrant world of Security Breach and turns it into a destroyed mall, perfect for urban exploring. But even through all this rubble, there's plenty of things the game hides out of view and out of bounds. Today we'll be showing off everything hidden within these areas, and of course, we'll be breaking things along the way too. Like finding an old forgotten friend, and messing with these beloved killer bots. Glorious! So, I hope you enjoy this deep dive into FNAF Ruin. As always, I'm going to hit you with quick recaps of each chapter before diving in, so you can remember the flow of events. So, we've just gotten out of the server rooms from the previous chapter, which brings us to Chapter 5. It begins with this encounter with Roxy, as we're tasked with following her. This leads to some node breaching, along with an unavoidable encounter with the entity, as we detect the anomalies with the security camera station. However, if done quickly enough, we can avoid the danger, and breach this security node in the Glamrock Beauty Salon section. We'll then traverse through this Western-themed area, which leads to this interaction with Monty Boy. After our electrifying encounter with Monty, the player will journey through this under-construction zone, which leads us to the beginning of Chapter 6. Going back to the beginning of Chapter 5 though, we can go out of bounds and get a look at the entirety of this Glamrock Beauty Salon area. The virtual world we enter when putting the mask on is set below the real world once again. But let's take a look at that cutscene with Roxy. She can be seen crying as she states, "You're not trying hard enough." Cassie can't help but feel bad for her, as she says poor Roxy, which alerts Roxy to our presence. While Cassie is normally behind cover, we can see Roxy get up and slide to where she needs to be, as this cutscene takes place. Luckily for Cassie's sake, Roxy hears, Gregory, which causes her to disregard Cassie to pursue him. Watching this unfold from a different perspective, we can see Roxy stops after making her leap through the door once she's out of the player's sight. Her model will end up freezing out here and eventually despawn as Cassie's dialogue finishes. During all this, I noticed we can't enter this cutscene while wearing the mask, as it will just take the mask off as the scene begins. However, if we go down below, prior to the cutscene, we can find Roxy's VR model sitting down here. As the cutscene begins, the model does end up despawning, which brings to question the presence of the VR Roxy model to begin with. After we're done talking to Trust Me Bro Gregory, we can open this door and find Roxy continuing her pursuit. Deleting the door, we can see she isn't there, and it isn't until we open the door that she is loaded back in. The way she runs as she flails her arms about is great, but following her, we'll see that she makes her way through these doors and ends up disappearing in the Western room once again. We must now breach these nodes, which will lead to this interaction with the entity. It's always cool to see the entity in slow motion, as it digitally teleports all about. But I digress. At one point, the virtual Chica had been sent after me by the entity, so I tried deleting her from existence to avoid death. But this does not stop Chica from devouring us. She killed me from beyond the grave. Moving on, we can see Chica comes to rest here in the bathroom, and will kill the player if you get too close. However, if the player successfully gets to the 20th wave of Chica's Feeding Frenzy, the minigame from Chapter 4, they'll be awarded Chica's voice box. Having the voice box at this part allows us to repair her. Cassie will reluctantly do this, with Chica activating briefly as she says, "I smell pizza," before shutting down. This was definitely an interesting interaction, but as I was exploring this area with the camera, you can see my screen began changing colors, dipping in and out of darkness. I couldn't make out what was happening at the time, but I thought the entity was trying to get me, and when I came back to my character, as I took the mask off, I realized it put me into the void. Goodbye, cruel world. Coming back in another instance, I realized all this distortion I was experiencing was in fact from the entity killing us. Well, more so Chica. Watching Chica get Cassie from this perspective is interesting, because once the virtual Chica reaches us, we're then forced out of our mask, resulting with our character being pulled up to the real world. At this point, Chica has Cassie on the floor as she lowers towards her, all while peering into her soul with those sad, disturbing eyes. You'll notice what appears to be a bag hanging off Chica's waist, and seeing it from this perspective is definitely strange. It moves around oddly through the entirety of this sequence. I am curious to know what's inside of it though. Food for thought? Now that we have all the nodes done, we can move on and pursue Roxy. In this little western section, we can go back into this area as we find this door within a wall, which was interesting. There's also what appears to be a ride that's over here that I wanted to try to get on. However, this results in instant death basically. As you can see, it doesn't look like much was back here to begin with. So with that, let's push on as this next area loads in. This is where we encounter Monty Boy, aka the Terminator. We can find him spawning here in this slide as he prepares to drop down and enter the scene. He'll fall graciously as he makes his way to us. I thought I'd try shrinking myself here to see if I could get up close and personal with Monty, and we are clearly too small for him to interact with us. All the water around him started to glitch out as I did this, slightly bogging my game down. I'm assuming it probably has something to do with me standing under him, as he's trying to turn to get me, but we occupy the same position, thus repeating his water interaction over and over. However, we can take a closer look at Monty when he does get his claws on Cassie. We've covered his jump scare in a previous chapter, but let's take a look at it again with water. When he enters into the jump scare animation, he leaps out of the water as he gets a hold of Cassie and proceeds to push her into the water. He'll then go bite her as she tries to hold him off. This struggle, like all the other jump scare animations, occurs much quicker than what we're currently seeing, as it is slowed down. Luckily though, for Cassie's sake, our story doesn't end like this. Through the second door, we end up putting Monty in an electrifying situation. A brief cutscene takes place as we nearly escape and watch him get destroyed. You'll see that he spawns within these pallets as it begins. It's probably fair to say that we won't be seeing Monty again though, as he ends up clipping through these stairs, where he despawns in this watery grave. This leads us through a construction area where not much takes place outside of normal gameplay, but this does bring us into Chapter 6. So in this chapter we make our way into Roxy Raceway. We eventually catch up to Roxy as we're tasked with using multiple security camera station intercoms to essentially guide Roxy. This in turn will allow us to use Roxy to break a couple of doors down that we need to eventually go through. We have a run-in with a rogue race car too, along with his close encounter with Roxy as well. This then follows with lots of halls and stairs that eventually lead us into Chapter 7. Going back to the beginning of Roxy Raceway, we can see that it's the only location loaded in as we enter it. As you can see, not much is happening out of bounds. Coming back in though, most players will know that there's a staff bot that has seen better days here, as it jump scares us with kindness, which I can say did scare me the first time I played through the game. When we charge these conduits, we can see Roxy spawns right by this door that we need to get through. Roxy will just pace through this section until we get her to crash through the door with the intercom. Instead, I tried going around her as I prepared to destroy the door myself. I mean, I could have just erased her from the game, but that felt a bit direct. So I destroyed the door, but then I got really confused here as I believed I had bypassed her, but I could hear her talking as if she was up ahead of me. Using the camera, I figured I see her in the path ahead, only to find that she is still lurking around the first section. So I guess I semi-broke it? However, as soon as you make this turn, we'll see that she spawns up ahead of us as the other one disappears, or they just moved the same instance. In my confusion while dealing with this Roxy, I tried breaking out of bounds here, seeing if I could explore more of this area with Cassie. I unfortunately fell through the floor during one of these attempts, which ended up killing me. I also ended up just getting stuck a lot, which is worse than death, honestly. Let's take a closer look at Roxy when she gets her metal claws on us. When Roxy's jump scare animation begins, we can see she ferociously crouches down at us as she prepares to pick Cassie up. She'll lift us high into the air and slam us to the ground as she then readies to bite our face. This of course is all playing at a much slower speed and normally takes place fairly fast, but as you can see it's quite a terrifying experience no matter how you look at it. No more adventures for this pair of floating arms. Once I reloaded, Roxy was back in the first section of this area, which didn't last long, because if we progress from here and clear the conduits for this door, Roxy will jump scare us as we try to move on. Watching this from another perspective, we can see how she will just appear behind the player. She's screaming for her eyes to be returned to her, as she realizes she's possibly overreacting, promptly letting Cassie go. The door will shut, and Roxy will freeze, immediately despawning. I can't help but feel bad for Roxy, as she seems to be conflicted with her actions throughout the entirety of the DLC. I mean, I'd probably be losing it too if my eyes were missing, but I digress. If we jump back a scene though, you'll know that we have this run-in with this race car. A cutscene will occur with the car's lights turning on as it begins to screech towards us. If the player isn't fast enough to react, the car can kill them. Watching this occur from this perspective shows that once the car hits us, it simply deletes us from existence. So to mix things up, I tried to counter this race car with a suit of armor. As in Freddy. Joke's on me though, because the Freddy that spawns in has very little charge, and when I tried this, he turned on me. The result was interesting though. After climbing into Freddy, he almost immediately begins our death animation with him. The race car is coming at us during all of this though, which results in an incoming head-on collision with Freddy. He'll end up getting pushed slightly as he continues destroying Cassie. It's too bad the car couldn't have saved us. This was not the end result I was expecting with this, but here we are. Thanks for nothing, Freddy. The previous area we just went through will unload, which we can see since I decided to delete the door. Looking around though, various objects are floating about out here, including one of the Roxys that we bypassed earlier, who is also falling in this white abyss. We can get a better look at all of this if we switch the view, along with part of the next chapter loading in as well. We could even see the security node wires that we'll encounter soon, and even an old friend who we'll get back to in a little bit. He's floating out here just waiting to be discovered. There's also this random sink below the map. For what reason? I have no idea. And along with this, there's a red curtain out of bounds as well, which may be further into the chapter, or perhaps a previous chapter. I'm not entirely sure. Anyways, I came back to this Roxy that was falling, and it appears this fall is never ending. Bon voyage, Roxy! Moving onward, we'll have a conversation with Gregory about the sinkhole under the raceway, with the door eventually opening. When it comes to being out of bounds here, not a lot is happening, so we proceed towards Chapter 7's area. Chapter 7 begins with some random halls that eventually lead to the Bonnie Bowl area. This entire area consists of multiple camera stations, along with 4 child nodes we need to deactivate. The mini music men are in this section and can be found guarding most of the nodes. The player needs to pull these musical peeps away by using the camera stations to trigger distractions. It can be fairly difficult, as some of these guys can linger and surprise the player if they aren't careful. I've even found myself having issues with them responding to the intercom. They just decide to not move. When the jump scare animation begins for these little fellas, you can see one that appears in our face, with another down to our left, and one that's floating up above us. Throughout this animation, each one takes turns harassing Cassie, starting with the front and center music man, followed by the one below our normal sight, and finally with the third one dropping down to join the fun. This all, of course, takes place much faster than what we're observing here, but it was interesting to see from this perspective nonetheless. At any rate, once deactivating all the nodes and breaching the security node, the player will proceed to the end of this chapter, which involves going down this trippy digital wormhole that eventually ends with this terrifying encounter with the entity as we load into Chapter 8. So going back, as we're making our way to the bowling area, we will come across some rooms we can normally enter while wearing the mask. I got into these rooms without the mask to see if there was anything interesting. However, I didn't really find anything, but when I was messing around and fell through the map, I noticed this big fancy hallway under the level. I realized it can normally be seen from the bowling alley area through the damaged floor, but all that's down here is a couple of what I believe could be air hockey tables. Regardless, I tried coming down here as Cassie, with the unsurprising result of falling through the floor. Unglorious. Before I do any more exploring though, I'm gonna go ahead and just delete these music men, as I really can't do anything with them outside of dying. I did try going mini to see if I could have got up close and personal, but as you can see, that's a F in the chat. Even hiding in the debris doesn't save you from them. They are relentless. However, back in the bowling alley area, a secret area awaits us. If the player goes throughout the game deactivating all these wet floor bots, they can gain access to this area, which has this creepy ritual-like scene taking place. It consists of a demolished Glamrock Bonnie, who can be found laying on the ground with these 4 wet floor bots placed around him. It's quite the scene. Judging by the claw marks on his torn open stomach, a popular theory is that Monty ended up destroying Bonnie, which is kinda sad given the earlier story we saw of Monty being inspired and also given an opportunity by Bonnie. Once we get all these child nodes deactivated in the Bonnie Bowl area though, we'll end up heading back to the main security node and then progressing through this little stage. I could have just deleted these curtains to begin with, but obviously that wouldn't be nearly as fun. Once inside, we'll normally end up taking this trippy slide out of here, which ultimately leads to the next chapter. I did a little exploring though, and managed to get out of bounds here. We can see the vent that we normally crouch through to access the wormhole, as I'm able to walk on this floor out here. I ended up jumping on the vent and was able to walk on top of it. Getting to the top though, you'll see that I automatically dropped into the vent as the wormhole cutscene begins. This scene has our player falling through this digital looping tunnel for quite a while, as we see various wireframed objects fly by us. Eventually, we find ourselves face to face with the entity, as the screen fades to white, concluding Chapter 7. Checking out the sequence from Out of Bounds reveals that it's not quite as it seems in regards to how we're actually traveling through it. It appears as if we're swirling all about while we're in here, but you'll see as we enter, we're actually put in this endless ring. This makes our trip through this portal appear longer than it is, as we continuously loop inside it. Eventually, we are redirected with the path changing. Beyond the entity's head, we can see the path ends, which we never reach anyways, as we're loaded into another instance. However, when I got out of the free cam during this, I realized that I never loaded out of the section due to the camera mode glitching the game. Most of the surrounding area was unloaded though, leaving me stranded on this vent. I tried starting the sequence over, but couldn't take the wormhole again. This sadly led to my death. But with that, this concludes our broken adventure through chapters 5, 6, and 7. I hope you all enjoyed this, and I'll catch you all in the next video very soon. Cheers!